The mahogany gavel slammed down, echoing like a gunshot through the silent courtroom of District Court 4 in Seattle. Rowan Sterling stood tall, adjusting his $3,000 Italian silk tie, a smirk playing on his lips. He had just told the court, under oath, that his wife of 20 years, Elvira, was nothing more than a leech who sat on the couch while he built a multi-million-dollar empire from scratch. He claimed she had never worked a day in her life. The judge turned to Elvira, expecting a defense. Elvira didn't speak. She simply slid a heavy box across the table. When the judge opened the first folder and saw the signature at the bottom of the billion-dollar merger Rowan claimed he had engineered, his eyes went wide. Rowan's smirk vanished. He had no idea that for 2 decades he hadn't been the boss. She was. The rain battered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse apartment, overlooking the glittering skyline of downtown Seattle. Inside, the air was temperature-controlled, scented with expensive sandalwood, and thick with tension. Rowan Sterling sat at the head of the long dining table, the remnants of a meal he hadn't touched sitting cold on a porcelain plate. Across from him sat Elvira. She was 44, though the stress lines around her eyes made her look older tonight. She wore a simple grey cardigan, her hair pulled back in a practical, unglamorous bun. She looked exactly like what Rowan told everyone she was, a tired, boring housewife. "I'm done, Elvira," Rowan said, his voice devoid of emotion. He didn't even look at her. He was busy checking stock prices on his phone. Elvira placed her fork down gently. She didn't scream, she didn't cry. She just looked at him with an unsettling calmness. "Done with what, Rowan? The risotto? I can ask Maria to make something else." "Don't play stupid," Rowan snapped, finally locking eyes with her. "I'm done with us. With this." He gestured vaguely at the space between them. "I've outgrown you. It's been happening for years, but now it's undeniable." He stood up and walked over to the sideboard, pouring himself a glass of scotch. "I need a partner, Elvira. A power player. Someone who understands the world I live in. You're content with your garden and your charity luncheons. You have no idea what it takes to run Sterling Dynamics. You have no idea of the pressure I'm under." Elvira took a sip of water. "I understand more than you think, Rowan." Rowan laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "You understand how to spend the money I make. That's it. You've never worked a day in your life. You've never had to negotiate a deal, never had to fire someone, never had to stay up until 4 a.m. worrying about a merger collapsing." He pulled a manila envelope from his briefcase and tossed it onto the table. It slid across the polished wood and stopped inches from her hand. "Divorce papers," he said. "I'm being generous. You get the lake house and a monthly stipend. Enough to keep you comfortable, but don't expect a piece of the company. That's mine. I built it. My blood, my sweat." Elvira looked at the envelope but didn't touch it. "And Jessica? Is she part of this new partner requirement?" Rowan stiffened. "Jessica is a brilliant marketing executive. She gets me. And yes, we are seeing each other. I'm not going to lie about it. I deserve happiness, Elvira. I deserve someone who brings something to the table besides a casserole." The cruelty of his words hung in the air. For 20 years, Elvira had been the silent shadow behind him. When they met, Rowan was a frantic, disorganized vision chaser with a lot of debt and a bad temper. Elvira was the one who organized his books. Elvira was the one who proofread his emails, because his grammar was atrocious. But as the money started rolling in, Rowan's ego inflated until it pushed her out of the frame completely. "You're making a mistake, Rowan," Elvira said softly. "Not about the divorce. If you want to leave, leave. But claiming I contributed nothing? That is a dangerous lie to tell yourself. It's not a lie if it's verifiable fact, Rowan shouted, his face reddening. My name is on the door. My name is on the patents. You are a dependent. On tax forms, on insurance. In life, you are a dependent. And now I'm cutting the cord. He downed the rest of his scotch and slammed the glass down. Sign the papers. If you fight me, I'll bury you in legal fees until you're living in a cardboard box. My lawyer is Magnus Thorne. You know the reputation. Elvira nodded slowly. Everyone knew Magnus Thorne. He was a pit bull in a suit, known for destroying spouses in high-net-worth divorces. I'll see you in court, Rowan, she said. Rowan scoffed as he grabbed his coat. Don't embarrass yourself, Elvira. You can't afford a lawyer who can beat Thorne. He walked out the door, the heavy slam signaling the end of their marriage. Elvira sat in the silence for a long time. Then she stood up, walked over to a locked drawer in the antique desk in the corner of the living room, and pulled out a small key. She unlocked the bottom drawer and retrieved a heavy, leather-bound ledger and a stack of external hard drives. She dialed a number on her cell phone. It rang once before being picked up. Hello, Mrs. Sterling? A sharp, professional female voice answered. Hello, Catherine, Elvira said, her voice changing from the soft wife to a tone of steel command. Initiate Protocol 7. Rowan just served the papers. Understood, the voice replied. Shall I call the partners at Apex Holdings? Call them all, Elvira said, and get me Judge Harland's schedule. Rowan wants to claim I never worked. I think it's time we showed him exactly who has been running the show. 3 weeks later, Rowan sat in the plush leather chair of Magnus Thorne's corner office. The view was even better than Rowan's penthouse. From here, you could look down on the rest of the city like a god. Magnus Thorne was a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite and dressed by a tailor who hated wrinkles. He flipped through the file Rowan had given him, shaking his head with a dismissive chuckle. It's textbook, Rowan, Magnus said, tossing the file onto his desk. She has no leverage. Prenup was signed 20 years ago. It's old, but valid enough to set a precedent. She hasn't been employed since 2004. No independent income, no business assets in her name. We offer her the silver package, the lake house, and 10 grand a month for 5 years. If she refuses, we go for zero alimony based on the fact that she has a degree she never used. We can argue she is voluntarily underemployed. Rowan grinned, leaning back. She kept saying I was making a mistake. Can you believe the nerve? I built Sterling Dynamics from a garage operation into a global logistics giant. I'm the one flying to Tokyo and London. I'm the one shaking hands. Spouses often have delusions of grandeur during separation, Magnus said smoothly. They think because they hosted a few dinner parties, they're part of the board of directors. Who is representing her? Rowan checked his phone. Some guy named Samuel P. Vance? Never heard of him. Magnus paused, his brow furrowing slightly. Vance? Sam Vance? Yeah, you know him. Magnus tapped his pen against the desk, a look of calculation crossing his face. He's old school. Retired about 5 years ago. Used to handle corporate litigation, not family law. He was the lead counsel for the merger between Omnicorp and the State Bank. He's a heavyweight, but he's rusty. And he's definitely not a divorce attorney. Strange choice. Probably the only one she could afford, Rowan laughed. She's probably paying him with her jewelry. Likely, Magnus shrugged, dismissing the concern. Look, the strategy is simple. We depose her. We make her admit on record that she has zero knowledge of the day-to-day operations of Sterling Dynamics. We ask her technical questions. What is the Q3 EBITDA? What is the supply chain protocol for the Singapore route? She won't know a thing. Once she looks incompetent, The judge won't grant her a dime of the company shares. She doesn't know anything, Rowan assured him. She spends her days gardening and reading romance novels. The most complex thing she does is order the groceries. Perfect. Magnus slammed the file shut. We have the preliminary hearing on Tuesday. I'll draft a motion to freeze the joint accounts immediately so she can't drain them. Meanwhile, across town, in a small, dusty office that smelled of old paper and pipe tobacco, Elvira sat across from Samuel Vance. Samuel was 72, wearing a tweed jacket that looked like it had survived a war. He wasn't flashy like Magnus Thorne, but his eyes were sharp as tacks. "Thorne is going to try to humiliate you, Elvira," Samuel said, his voice gravelly. "He's going to paint you as the quintessential trophy wife, lazy, entitled, and clueless." "I know," Elvira said. She reached into a tote bag, not a designer purse, but a sturdy leather bag, and pulled out a stack of documents 3 inches thick. "That's why I brought the shadow files." Samuel adjusted his glasses and pulled the stack closer. He flipped open the first page. It was a contract for the initial seed funding of Sterling Dynamics, dated 18 years ago. "This is Rowan's signature," Samuel noted. "Look closer," Elvira said. "Page 4, Section C, the guarantor clause." Samuel turned the page. His eyebrows shot up. "The guarantor isn't Rowan, it's E.M. Blackwood?" "My maiden name," Elvira said. "Rowan had bad credit. No bank would touch him. I put up my inheritance from my grandmother as collateral. I signed the guarantee. If the company had failed, I would have lost everything. Rowan never read page 4. He just signed where the banker told him to." Samuel hummed, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. He flipped to the next document. It was a complex logistics agreement with a Chinese manufacturing giant, the deal that had made Sterling Dynamics famous. "This is the Shanghai deal," Samuel said. "Rowan brags about this in every interview. He says he drank the CEO under the table and got the deal signed on a napkin." "Rowan passed out at 9 p.m., Elvira corrected. "I stayed up with Mr. Zhang. We spoke Mandarin. I negotiated the tariffs and the shipping lanes. Rowan signed the final formal contract the next morning with a hangover. He didn't even notice the terms had changed in our favor by 15%. He thought he was just lucky." Samuel looked up at her, genuine awe in his eyes. "And you have proof?" "Mr. Zhang sent me a personal email confirming the terms that night. I have it printed here. And look at the initials on the bottom of the routing manifest." Samuel squinted. There, in tiny, precise ink, were the initials E.S. "He never checked the manifests," Elvira said. "He just wanted the glory. I did the logistics. For 20 years, Samuel. Rowan is the face. He's the mascot. But I am the engine, and I have a signature on every major file that built that company." Samuel closed the folder and leaned back, a wide, predatory grin spreading across his face. "Rowan thinks he's walking into a slaughter," the old lawyer said. "He is, but he doesn't realize he's the cow." "One more thing," Elvira said, her voice dropping lower. "The IRS audit of 2018. Samuel froze. "The one that almost bankrupted the firm?" "Rowan wanted to bribe the auditor," Elvira revealed. "I stopped him. I spent 3 nights rewriting the books to correct his creative accounting legally. I wrote a check from my personal savings, money I made investing quietly, to cover the discrepancy so the company wouldn't be fined. I signed the settlement agreement with the IRS. Rowan thinks the problem just went away." Samuel laughed, a deep, hearty sound. "Magnus Thorne is going to have a stroke in the courtroom. This isn't a divorce case, Elvira. This is a corporate hostile takeover." "He wanted a partner," Elvira said, standing up and smoothing her skirt. "He wanted someone who understands his world. I'm going to show him that I don't just understand his world, I own it. The conference room at Thorne and Associates was designed to intimidate. The walls were lined with books on maritime law and corporate litigation that had likely never been opened, and the air conditioner was set to a freezing temperature, a psychological tactic Magnus Thorne used to make opposing parties physically uncomfortable. Elvira sat opposite Rowan and Magnus. Next to her, Samuel Vance looked like he was about to fall asleep, his eyes half closed behind his thick spectacles. "State your name for the record," the court reporter droned. "Elvira Marie Sterling." Magnus Thorne leaned forward, interlacing his fingers. He had a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mrs. Sterling, we are here to establish the extent of your contribution to the marital assets, specifically Sterling Dynamics. Now, in your own words, how would you describe your role in the company?" Elvira adjusted the microphone slightly. "I was a supportive spouse." Rowan snorted loudly from across the table. He was texting under the table, likely messaging Jessica. "Supportive," Magnus repeated, mocking the word. "Did you ever hold an official title? Were you on the payroll? Did you have a company email address?" "No," Elvira said calmly. "So, you never drew a salary. You never clocked in. Yet, you are asking for 50% of a company valued at $400 million. "I'm asking for what is fair," Elvira replied. Magnus slid a piece of paper across the table. "This is a list of the company's major milestones. The acquisition of Redline Shipping in 2010. The merger with Blue Sky Logistics in 2015. Were you present at the closing table for any of these deals?" "Physically?" "No," Elvira said. "Did you draft the contracts?" "I did not type them, no." Magnus looked at the camera recording the deposition with a satisfied nod. "So, you were not present, you didn't type the contracts, and you weren't on the payroll. Mrs. Sterling, can you even tell me what the company's current debt-to-equity ratio is?" It was a trap question. Rowan looked up, grinning. He knew Elvira didn't read the quarterly reports he left on his desk. Or so he thought. Elvira looked at Rowan. She saw the arrogance in his jawline, the same arrogance that had almost cost them the company back in 2008, when the housing market crashed. 0.45, Elvira said softly. The smile on Rowan's face faltered for a fraction of a second. Magnus frowned. "Excuse me?" "The debt-to-equity ratio is 0.45, Elvira repeated, her voice steady, although it would have been 0.38 if Rowan hadn't insisted on purchasing the new fleet of Gulfstream jets for executive travel last quarter, which was categorized as a capital expenditure, but really serves as a personal vanity project. That purchase inflated the liability column significantly. Silence descended on the room. The hum of the air conditioner seemed to get louder. Rowan slammed his hand on the table. "She guessed, or she read my mail." Magnus held up a hand to silence his client. He narrowed his eyes at Elvira. "You read the annual report." "I read everything, Mr. Thorne," Elvira said. "Memorizing numbers doesn't mean you understand the business," Magnus snapped, recovering his footing. "Tell me, if a shipment is detained in the port of Rotterdam due to a Tier 3 hazmat violation, what is the standard protocol for Sterling Dynamics?" It was a specific, operational question. Only someone on the logistics floor would know the answer. Rowan leaned back, crossing his arms. Got her, he thought. Tier 3 violations in Rotterdam fall under EU Regulation 882, Elvira recited, without skipping a beat. You don't contact the Port Authority first. You contact the secondary insurer to trigger the force majeure clause to avoid the delay penalty fees from the client. Then, you reroute the cargo to Antwerp via rail, reclassifying it under the Dutch-Belgian Transit Treaty of 1998. If you call the Port Authority first, they impound the ship for 6 weeks. If you move it, it's a 24-hour delay. Rowan learned that the hard way in 2012. Didn't you, dear? Rowan's mouth fell open. He stared at her, his face draining of colour. He remembered 2012. He remembered panicking when the ship was stopped. He remembered calling Elvira at 3 a.m., crying that the company was ruined. He remembered her telling him exactly what to do, but in his memory, he had rewritten history. He had convinced himself he solved it. She must have heard me talking about it on the phone, Rowan stammered, looking at his lawyer. She's just parroting what I said. Samuel Vance finally spoke, his voice dry as dust. Are we done with the trivia contest? My client would like to go home and water her hydrangeas. Magnus Thorne looked at Elvira with a newfound suspicion. He realized suddenly that this wasn't going to be the easy slaughter he had promised Rowan. But his ego wouldn't let him back down. We're done for today, Magnus said, shoving his papers into his briefcase. But don't think a few lucky answers will save you in court, Mrs. Sterling. Judges care about paper trails, and you don't have one. Elvira stood up, smoothing her skirt. She looked at Rowan, who was refusing to make eye contact. See you in court, Rowan, she said. As she walked out, Samuel leaned in close to her. You rattled him. Good, Elvira said. But he's still arrogant. He thinks because my name isn't on the door, it's not on the foundation. While the deposition was happening, chaos was brewing at the Sterling Dynamics headquarters. Jessica, the woman Rowan had left Elvira for, was sitting in Rowan's office. She was 28, beautiful, and held a degree in marketing. She was excellent at planning launch parties and managing the company's Instagram. She was not, however, good at logistics. Ms. Davis? Rowan's assistant, a frazzled woman named Sarah, knocked on the door. We have a situation with the Venezuela account. Jessica looked up from her phone. Can't it wait? Rowan is at his deposition. No, Mum. The client is threatening to pull the contract. They said the routing numbers for the oil equipment are wrong. They're stuck in customs in Caracas. Well, just call the customs office and tell them to let it through, Jessica said dismissively. Tell them who we are. Sarah looked uncomfortable. That's not how it works in Venezuela, Ms. Davis. Usually when this happens, Mrs. Sterling handles it. Jessica's eyes flashed. Mrs. Sterling doesn't work here. I am the acting VP of operations. Why would Elvira handle it? She used to call the embassy, Sarah stammered. She knew the trade attaché by name. She sent a specific form. I don't need Elvira's help, Jessica snapped. Send the paperwork again. Mark it urgent. And send a fruit basket to the customs officer. Sarah left the room, her face pale. She knew sending a fruit basket to a Venezuelan customs official could be interpreted as a bribe, or worse, an insult depending on the region. She walked back to her desk and put her head in her hands. We're doomed, she whispered to the receptionist. Rowan thinks he's the genius, but Elvira was the safety net. He just cut the net. The day of the trial, the sky was a bruised purple, threatening a storm. Courtroom 4 was packed. Divorce proceedings were usually private, but the dissolution of the Sterling Empire had attracted the attention of the business press. Reporters lined the back benches, pens poised. Rowan entered wearing a navy bespoke suit, looking every inch the titan of industry. Jessica was on his arm, wearing a white dress that looked more appropriate for a wedding than a court hearing. She smirked at Elvira as they passed. Elvira sat alone at the defense table, Samuel Vance beside her. She wore a dark blue suit, conservative and sharp. On the table in front of her sat the heavy cardboard box she had retrieved from her locked drawer. Judge Harland entered. He was a man known for his impatience with theatrics. He adjusted his glasses and looked down at the parties. "We are here to determine the equitable distribution of assets in the matter of Sterling v. Sterling," Judge Harland boomed. "Mr. Thorne, you may begin." Magnus Thorne stood up, buttoning his jacket. He strode to the center of the room, exuding confidence. "Your Honor," Magnus began, his voice booming. "This case is simple. It is a case of a self-made man who pulled himself up by his bootstraps to build an American dream, and a spouse who, while present, contributed nothing to the business enterprise. Elvira Sterling has not been employed in 20 years. She has no background in logistics. She has no degrees in business. She is a domestic partner, and she is entitled to a domestic settlement. But she is demanding half of a global corporation she didn't help build. We intend to prove that Rowan Sterling is the sole architect of this empire." He gestured to Rowan, who nodded solemnly, practicing the look of a long-suffering genius. "Mr. Vance?" the judge asked. Samuel Vance didn't stand up immediately. He slowly arranged his notepad. Then he rose, looking frail and harmless. "Your Honor," Samuel said, his voice quiet. "We don't intend to give a speech. We intend to show you the receipts." He sat down. The brevity of the statement caused a ripple of whispers in the gallery. Magnus Thorne rolled his eyes. "Call your first witness," the judge said. Magnus called Rowan to the stand. Rowan walked up, took the oath, and sat down, projecting charisma. "Mr. Sterling," Magnus asked, "who secured the initial funding for Sterling Dynamics?" "I did," Rowan said firmly. "I went to 15 banks. I pitched the idea. I secured the loan." "And who negotiated the landmark deal with Omni Shipping?" "I did," Rowan said. "It was a tough room, but I closed it. And the day-to-day operations, the hiring, the firing, the strategy? All me," Rowan said. "Elvira, she managed the house. She's a wonderful homemaker. But business? No, she doesn't have the stomach for it." Magnus smiled. "Thank you. Your witness?" Samuel Vance stood up. He walked slowly toward the witness stand. He didn't look aggressive. He looked like a confused grandfather. "Mr. Sterling," Samuel began, "you said you secured the initial loan. The seed capital, I believe it's called?" "Yes," Rowan said, sounding bored. "And that was from First National Bank in 2003? "That's right. And the bank required collateral, did it not?" "Standard procedure," Rowan waved a hand. "I put up the business assets." "But there were no business assets in 2003, Samuel said politely. "It was a start-up. You had a laptop and a rented desk. So what was the collateral?" Rowan frowned. He honestly couldn't remember. "It was personal guarantees. My future earnings." Samuel walked back to the defense table and nodded to Elvira. She reached into the box and pulled out a folder marked Exhibit A. Samuel handed it to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge and Rowan. "Please look at page 4, Mr. Sterling," Samuel said. "Who is listed as the guarantor?" Rowan looked at the document. It was the original loan agreement. He scanned down to the bottom. His eyes widened. Guarantor, Elvira Marie Blackwood. Asset pledged, the Blackwood Family Trust and Estate. I don't," Rowan stammered. "Your wife pledged her entire inheritance," Samuel said, his voice sharpening. $300,000. If you had failed, she would have been destitute. Did you know she did that, Mr. Sterling?" I thought the bank just approved me based on my credit," Rowan said, his voice rising in pitch. "Your credit score was 520 at the time," Samuel said dryly. "The bank wouldn't have loaned you a pen, let alone $100,000. Elvira bought your company, Mr. Sterling. She didn't just support it. She bought the ticket so you could get on the ride. A murmur went through the courtroom. Jessica shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "That's just money," Rowan snapped, regaining his composure. "Anyone can write a check. That doesn't mean she worked. I ran the company. I did the deals." "Let's talk about the deals," Samuel said. He signaled Elvira again. She pulled out a thicker folder. "Exhibit B. The Shanghai expansion," Samuel said. 2009. The deal that made you an international player. You claim you negotiated the exclusivity clause with Mr. Zhang. "I did," Rowan insisted. "We had dinner. We shook hands." "Exhibit B," Samuel announced. "This is a transcript of the email correspondence between the Sterling account and Mr. Zhang's office regarding the contract specifics. Note the timestamps." The judge flipped through the pages. "Mr. Sterling," Samuel said, "these emails were sent between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. Seattle time for 3 weeks straight. Were you awake at those hours?" "Sometimes I work late," Rowan lied. "Really?" Samuel smiled. "Because according to your own autobiography, The Sterling Standard, Chapter 4, page 82, you state, 'I never compromise on sleep. I am in bed by 10 p.m. every night to ensure peak performance.'" Laughter rippled through the courtroom. Even the judge cracked a smile. "So, either you lied in your book, or you didn't write these emails," Samuel pressed. "And if you look at the syntax, Mr. Sterling, the writer uses fluent Mandarin pinyin references. Do you speak Mandarin?" "No," Rowan whispered. "Elvira does," Samuel said. "She minored in it in college. She wrote the contract. She negotiated the terms. She saved you 15% on tariffs. And do you know how we know it was her?" Samuel pointed to the document in the judge's hand. "Look at the signature on the draft approval line." Rowan looked. It wasn't a full signature. It was a small, stylized doodle of a flower, a black dahlia. "That's not a signature," Rowan scoffed. "That's a doodle." "It's a verification mark," Samuel corrected. "Elvira uses it on every file she has personally vetted. It's her seal of approval. And Mr. Sterling, if you look through that box—" Samuel pointed to the heavy box on Elvira's table. "You will find that flower on every major contract, every tax filing, and every employment agreement for the last 15 years. Rowan stared at the box. It looked like a coffin. "This is ridiculous." Magnus Thorne stood up, sensing his case wobbling. "So she proofread some emails. That makes her a secretary, not a partner." "We're just getting started, Mr. Thorne," Samuel said, his eyes cold. "We haven't even gotten to the part about who actually owns the patents." Rowan froze. The room went silent. "Patents," Rowan whispered. "The routing algorithm," Samuel said. "The Sterling algorithm that optimizes your shipping lanes. The one that is the crown jewel of your software division." "I invented that," Rowan shouted. "I drew it on a napkin." "You drew a squiggle on a napkin," Samuel said. "Elvira spent 6 months coding the logic flow, and she registered the copyright." Samuel dropped the bombshell. "She didn't register it under Sterling Dynamics, Rowan, because at the time the company was being sued, and she wanted to protect the asset. She registered it under her maiden name." The judge looked up, his eyebrows touching his hairline. "Mr. Vance, are you telling me that the core intellectual property of Sterling Dynamics is not owned by the company?" "That is correct, Your Honor," Samuel said. "It is the sole property of Elvira Sterling, and as of this morning, she has revoked the license for Sterling Dynamics to use it." Rowan stood up, his face turning purple. "You can't do that. The whole system will crash. The trucks, the ships, they won't know where to go." "Then I guess you better start looking at maps," Elvira said. It was the first time she had spoken in court. Her voice was calm, clear, and absolutely devastating. Rowan looked at her, and for the first time in 20 years, he didn't see a housewife. He saw the boss. And in the back of the room, Jessica stood up and quietly slipped out the door. She had just realized she bet on the wrong horse. The chaos didn't wait for the court session to adjourn. It started 10 minutes after Elvira's lawyer, Samuel Vance, sent the text message to the server administrator. Inside the headquarters of Sterling Dynamics, the main operations floor, usually a hum of quiet efficiency and clicking keyboards, erupted into panic. The massive digital map on the wall, which tracked the real-time movement of 300 cargo ships and 4,000 trucks, suddenly blinked red. Then, one by one, the tracking lights went dark. "What's happening?" shouted Mike Henderson, the director of logistics. He was furiously typing on his terminal. "I just lost the telemetry for the Pacific Fleet. The system is saying, 'License expired.'" "I'm getting it too," cried a dispatcher. "The routing software for the European trucks just shut down. It's asking for an authentication key. Drivers are calling in. They don't know where to drop the loads. I have 40 tons of frozen seafood sitting on a dock in Miami in 80-degree heat, and the system won't print the bill of lading." Rowan Sterling stormed into the building an hour later, his tie loosened, sweat beading on his forehead. He had run out of the courthouse, leaving Magnus Thorne to stammer excuses to the press. "Fix it!" Rowan screamed as he marched onto the floor. "Why are the screens dark? We are losing $100,000 a minute." Mike Henderson ran up to him, holding a tablet. "Rowan, the source code is locked. The error message says the intellectual property rights holder has revoked access. It's redirected to a domain, https www.google.com, search Kuhula, elviraholdings.com. Rowan stared at the screen. The text was blinking in mocking green pixels. "Access denied. Contact owner." "Bypass it," Rowan ordered. "Hack it, I don't care. We wrote this code." "We didn't," Mike said, his voice dropping. "I looked at the kernel logs. The core logic, the part that actually calculates the routes, is an external plugin. We've been pinging a server in Elvira's name for 10 years. We just thought it was an off-site backup. It's the brain, Rowan. Without it, the software is just a fancy map with no directions." Rowan felt the room spin. He retreated to his office, slamming the door. He dialed Jessica's number. It went straight to voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Jessica. I'm taking some personal time. Please leave a message." He threw the phone across the room. It shattered against the wall, leaving a dent in the expensive plaster. Then, the landline rang. It was the frantic ring of a line that wouldn't stop. Rowan picked it up. "Mr. Sterling," the voice was icy. It was Arthur Penhaligon, the senior VP of First National Bank. "We've just received a notification of a pending lawsuit regarding the ownership of your core assets. Specifically, the proprietary software that you listed as collateral for your operating line of credit." "It's a misunderstanding, Arthur," Rowan lied, his voice trembling. "Just a bitter divorce tactic. We'll have it sorted by Monday." "Monday is too late," Arthur said. "Our risk assessment team has flagged your account. If you do not own the algorithm, your company is over-leveraged by 400%. We are freezing your credit facilities immediately. Checks issued today will bounce, Rowan. Payroll will bounce." "You can't do that," Rowan yelled. "I have 3,000 employees." "Then I suggest you make peace with your wife," Arthur said. "Because without her signature, you are insolvent." The line went dead. Rowan sank into his leather chair. The silence in his office was deafening, contrasting sharply with the screaming chaos outside his glass walls. He watched his employees running around, shouting into phones, trying to use paper maps to route massive container ships. It was impossible. The modern supply chain was too complex for human brains. It needed the algorithm. It needed Elvira. He looked at the photo on his desk. It was him and Jessica in Cabo, taken 3 months ago. He had felt so young, so powerful. Now, looking at it, he realized Jessica was just a passenger. She liked the yacht. She didn't care about the engine room. Elvira was the mechanic who kept the engine running, and he had thrown her overboard. His office door opened. It wasn't an employee. It was Magnus Thorne. The lawyer looked disheveled. "You lied to me," Magnus hissed, closing the door. "I didn't know," Rowan pleaded. "I didn't know she owned the code." "You didn't know who owned the most valuable asset in your company?" Magnus laughed, a cruel, incredulous sound. "You are either the biggest fool in Seattle or the biggest liar. Either way, I'm withdrawing as your counsel." "You can't quit. We're in the middle of a trial." "I can't represent a client who commits perjury by omission," Magnus said, placing a termination letter on the desk. "And frankly, Rowan, you can't afford me anymore. The bank just called my billing department. Your retainer check was returned for insufficient funds." Magnus walked out. Rowan was truly alone. 3 days later, the stock price of Sterling Dynamics had plummeted by 60%. The news of the logistical blackout had gone global. Competitors were circling like sharks, poaching clients who were tired of their shipments being lost in limbo. Rowan looked like a ghost. He hadn't shaved. He was wearing the same shirt he had worn to court. He sat in a booth at the Rusty Anchor, a small, greasy spoon diner near the old docks. It was the place where he and Elvira used to eat 20 years ago, back when they were broke. He had texted her, "Please, the diner. 10 a.m. I'll sign whatever you want." She walked in at 10 a.m. sharp. She looked radiant. She wore a cream-colored trench coat and carried the same sensible leather bag. She didn't look like a vengeful ex-wife. She looked like a CEO. Samuel Vance was with her, acting as her silent guard. Elvira sat down opposite him. She didn't order coffee. "You look terrible, Rowan," she said. It wasn't an insult. It was an observation. "The company is bleeding out," Rowan said, his voice raspy. "Jessica left me. The bank froze the accounts. The board is voting to remove me as CEO tomorrow." "I know," Elvira said. "I spoke to the board this morning." Rowan's head snapped up. "You what?" "They called me. Rowan." "They wanted to know if I would turn the algorithm back on if they fired you." Rowan felt a cold spike in his chest. "And what did you say?" Elvira folded her hands on the table. "I told them that the algorithm is personal property. It doesn't belong to Sterling Dynamics. It belongs to me, and I don't do business with people who insult me." "I'm sorry," Rowan blurted out. "Okay? Is that what you want to hear?" "I'm sorry. I was arrogant. I took you for granted. I got caught up in the image, the money. But we built this together, Elvira. Don't destroy it just to punish me. Think of the employees." "I am thinking of them," Elvira said. "That's why I'm here to make you an offer." Samuel slid a thin document across the sticky table. Rowan looked at it. It was a share purchase agreement. "I will buy your shares," Elvira said. "My shares? I own 51% of the company," Rowan said. "Even with the stock crash, that's worth $50 million. "Read the price, Rowan," Samuel said softly. Rowan looked at the figure. "Purchase price, $1. "This is a joke," Rowan whispered. $1? You want to buy my life's work for $1? "Your life's work is currently valued at negative $40 million in debt," Elvira pointed out calmly. "Without my algorithm, the company is bankrupt. The liquidation value is less than the outstanding loans. You are personally liable for the bank loans because, as we established in court, you signed the director's guarantees last year without reading them." She leaned in closer. "If you don't sign this, Rowan, the bank takes everything. Your penthouse, your cars, your watch. You will file for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. You will be destitute. And because of the fraud investigation that the IRS is about to launch regarding those vanity expenses I mentioned, you might even face jail time." Rowan stared at her. "You planned this. You planned this whole thing." "I prepared for it," Elvira corrected. "There is a difference. I hoped you would be fair. I hoped you would say, 'Elvira, let's split this 50-50. If you had treated me with an ounce of respect, we would still be partners. But you wanted to erase me. So I erased you." She placed a pen on top of the document. "Sign the paper, Rowan. You walk away with your debt cleared. I take on the liabilities. I take the company. You get to keep your freedom. That's the deal." Rowan looked around the diner. Nobody was looking at him. Nobody knew he was Rowan Sterling, the logistics mogul. To them, he was just a sad man in a dirty shirt getting dumped. He thought about Jessica, who hadn't even texted to ask if he was okay. He thought about Magnus Thorne, who had abandoned him. He looked at Elvira. She wasn't angry anymore. She was just done. With a shaking hand, Rowan picked up the pen. "I built this," he whispered, a tear leaking out of his eye. "No, Rowan," Elvira said gently. "We built it. You just forgot who laid the bricks." He signed. Samuel took the paper immediately, checking the signature. He nodded to Elvira. "It's done." Elvira stood up. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She reached into a bag and pulled out a check. "I'm a woman of my word," she said. She placed a check for 1 dozerot on the table. "Good luck, Rowan." She walked out of the diner, the bell above the door chiming brightly. Samuel followed her. Rowan sat there for a long time, staring at the check. The waitress came over with a coffee pot. "Warm it up for you, hun?" she asked. Rowan looked at the $1. "Yeah," he said. "Warm it up." 45 minutes after leaving the diner, Elvira walked through the glass revolving doors of the Sterling Dynamics headquarters. She wasn't wearing the cardigan anymore. She wore a tailored black power suit that looked like armor. The lobby was quiet, a stark contrast to the panicked chaos of the previous days. The receptionist, a young woman whose eyes were red from crying over the fear of losing her job, looked up. She didn't recognize Elvira at first. "Can I help you, Mum?" "Yes," Elvira said, her voice projecting across the marble floor. "Call the board of directors. Tell them the new CEO has arrived, and tell Mike Henderson to meet me in the server room." She didn't wait for an elevator. She took the stairs, walking with a purpose that made people step out of her way. When she reached the operations floor, the silence was heavy. Hundreds of employees sat at dark screens, waiting for the inevitable announcement of mass layoffs. They looked up as Elvira walked to the center of the room. Mike Henderson ran up, looking exhausted. "Mrs. Sterling, what are you doing here?" Security said, "It's Ms. Blackwood now, Mike." Elvira corrected him gently. She handed him a flash drive. "Plug this into the main terminal. It's the authentication key." Mike stared at the drive, then at her. Hope, desperate and fragile, washed over his face. He didn't ask questions. He ran to the main console and jammed the drive in. Elvira pulled out her phone and tapped the screen 3 times. A low hum started in the corner of the room as the servers kicked back into high gear. On the massive wall screen, the red error message flickered and vanished. Suddenly, the map lit up. Thousands of green dots appeared, moving along shipping lanes and highways across the globe. The telemetry data started scrolling again. A collective gasp went through the room. Then, someone started clapping. It started slowly, then built into a roar of applause and cheers. Some people were crying in relief. Elvira didn't smile. She held up a hand, and the room fell instantly silent. She had their complete, undivided attention in a way Rowan never had. "The company is secure," Elvira announced, her voice calm but steel-edged. "The bank lines are open again. Payroll will be met this Friday." A sigh of relief swept the room. "However," Elvira continued, "things are going to change. The era of vanity projects, expense account abuse, and ignoring the people who actually do the work is over. Rowan Sterling is gone. He will not be returning." She walked over to the large corner office, Rowan's office. The door had his name engraved on a bronze plaque. "Mike," Elvira said, "get a screwdriver. Take that nameplate down." She turned back to the stunned staff. "My name is Elvira Blackwood. I have run the logistics of this company from my kitchen table for 20 years. Now I'm going to run it from here. Get back to work." The transition was brutal and swift. The board of directors, a group of old men who had happily drunk Rowan's expensive scotch while ignoring the company's rot, tried to push back during an emergency meeting an hour later. "Now see here, Elvira," sputtered the chairman, Walter Higgins. "You can't just waltz in here. We need a proper vetting process for a new CEO. You're a housewife." Elvira dropped a 50-page document onto the mahogany table. It landed with a heavy thud. "That," Elvira said, remaining standing, "is the revised strategic plan for the next 5 years. It includes cutting executive bonuses by 40% to reinvest in infrastructure, settling the IRS audit that Rowan ignored, and promoting Sarah Jenkins, the assistant Jessica Davis used as a coffee girl, to VP of Client Relations, because she's the only one who actually knows the customers." She leaned over the table, staring down the chairman. "I own the debt, Walter. I own the intellectual property. And as of this morning, I own 51% of the shares. You work for me now. If you don't like the direction, there's the door. But I suggest you stay seated, because if you leave, I'll have the forensic accountants look into your expense reports next." Walter Higgins sat back down. The room was silent. The trophy wife had just performed a hostile takeover in under 2 hours without raising her voice. 6 months later, the rain was drizzling outside a massive distribution warehouse on the outskirts of Seattle. It wasn't a Sterling facility. It was a competitor's, a budget outfit known for low pay and long hours. Rowan checked his watch. It was a cheap digital one. He'd pawned his Rolex months ago to pay the deposit on his studio apartment. His shift as the night dock supervisor was starting in 10 minutes. He looked tired. The arrogance was gone from his jawline, replaced by a stubble of grey beard and deep lines of stress. Jessica was long gone. She'd surfaced in Miami on the arm of a cryptocurrency visionary 3 weeks after Rowan's collapse. Magnus Thorne wouldn't take his calls. His old friends from the country club pretended not to see him if they crossed paths on the street. Rowan walked into the break room to grab a lukewarm coffee before his shift. A discarded newspaper was lying on a table. He picked it up. The business section front page featured a large color photograph. It was Elvira. She looked magnificent, standing on the deck of a new, eco-friendly cargo ship, cutting a ribbon. She was smiling, a real smile, one he hadn't seen in years. The headline read, "The Blackwood Renaissance, How Elvira, Blackwood Saved Sterling Dynamics and Revolutionized Global Shipping." The article described her as a visionary leader who had brought the company back from the brink of collapse, increasing profits by 30% in 2 quarters while raising employee wages. It mentioned her quiet fortitude and her unparalleled grasp of complex logistics. It didn't mention Rowan at all. He crumpled the paper and threw it in the trash. He walked out onto the loading dock, the cold rain hitting his face. "Hey, new guy," a forklift driver yelled at him. "That pallet isn't going to move itself. Hurry up." "Coming," Rowan muttered. He pulled on his work gloves and started stacking boxes. He was working in logistics, just like he always wanted. But now, he finally understood the truth. He had never been the king. He had just been the man sitting in the throne while the queen built the castle around him. And now, he was just another brick in someone else's wall. Rowan Sterling made the classic mistake of confusing visibility with value. He believed his own hype, thinking that because he was the one shaking hands and giving speeches, he was the source of the company's power. He erased the person who was the true engine of his success, convinced she was nothing more than a supporting character in his grand life story. But in business, as in life, paper trails don't lie. The judge didn't need a speech. He just needed to see the signatures. Elvira proved that sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one who hasn't said a word. Yet. Rowan lost everything, not because he was a bad businessman, but because he was a bad husband who underestimated the partner he should have cherished. In the end, the leech owned the lake, and the shark drowned. If you enjoyed this story of poetic justice and the ultimate turning of the tables, please smash that like button and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a drama. Have you ever been underestimated by someone close to you? Let us know in the comments below. We love hearing your stories. Thanks for watching, and remember, never mistake silence for weakness.